When South Korea was first established, it was one of the poorest nations in the world. The country relied on foreign aid to survive. From 1962 until 2018, South Korea's economy on average grew 7% annually. Today, South Korea has become one of the most prosperous nations in the world, and it regularly provides foreign aid to many struggling nations. The first half of the 20th century was marked with tragedy for South Korea. In 1910, Japan annexed the Korean peninsula and controlled it until 1945. When Japan unconditionally surrendered to the Allied forces, Korea was split into two nations, North and South Korea. South Korea suffered another setback when the Korean War began in the 1950s. War had destroyed South Korea. The country became one of the poorest nations in the world. No one believed South Korea could escape poverty, but hope came in the form of a new government. In the 1960s, General Park Chung-hee gained control of South Korea through a military coup. Up until the 1960s, South Korea was heavily dependent on foreign aid, but the Park government wanted an end to it. The government wanted the nation to be independent and successful. The Park government wanted South Korea to be a market-based economy to improve the overall efficiency of the South Korean economy. As South Korea didn't have any natural resources to export, the government decided the country needed to specialize in the export of manufactured goods. By the time the Park government came into power, the policy of mandatory elementary education had already begun in South Korea. The government expanded access to secondary, vocational, and tertiary education to its citizens. The Park government chose to start industrializing the country through a series of 5-year plans beginning in 1962. In the early stages of industrialization, the government placed high priority on developing the country's technological capacity. The government capitalized on its educated labor force by focusing on light manufacturing industries like textiles. As South Korea gained more capital and technology, it transitioned into more advanced industries. To build the infrastructure for an advanced economy, the Park government focused on getting foreign investment into the country. South Korea started to normalize relations with Japan in 1965. As relations improved with Japan, South Korea received $800 million in grants and loans, access to advanced technology and expertise from Japan. South Korea also deployed its military during the Vietnam War. In return, the United States helped South Korea with foreign aid. During this period, the U.S. economy had low tariff barriers, and it was open to exports from other countries. South Korea was able to export goods to the U.S., allowing it to grow its GDP and become less dependent on foreign aid. By 1972, South Korea's government began focusing on developing the heavy and petrochemical industries. The U.S. decided to pull its troops from South Korea, and the Park government felt that by promoting heavy and chemical industries, it could provide the foundations for its own national security and defense. To promote the heavy and chemical industrialization of South Korea, KAIST and Daedok Science Park were created to train people in science and technology. South Korea began investing in industrial facilities that could help produce metal, steel, machinery, ships, and cars. The Park government decided which industries it was going to promote and who controlled those industries. Government favors eventually turned these businesses into conglomerates known as chaebols. Chaebols were able to create economies of scale, which allowed them to compete globally. Having monopoly over certain markets allowed chaebols to take high risks outside of their core business. They did this by allocating resources to subsidiaries when they found new opportunities. As the economy became more complex, the government eventually withdrew, and the country started to rely on traditional market forces. This coincided with the democratization of South Korea. Even though South Korea prospers today, the country is facing a whole new set of challenges. Heavy government intervention in the economy has meant South Korea's economy is reliant on large conglomerates. The 10 largest chaebols produce 44% of the country's GDP. These businesses are so large and powerful that their presence makes it difficult for small businesses to thrive. The dominance of chaebols have also meant that job opportunities for young people are limited. Small businesses don't usually succeed in South Korea, so the most reliable jobs come from chaebols who don't hire often. This is one of the reasons why the country suffers from huge youth unemployment, forcing young people to put off having families until they are financially secure. Those who are fortunate enough to have a job work overtime, which provides little time to settle down and have a family. As a result, many young people remain unmarried and don't have children, which has resulted in a low fertility rate. The problem has gotten so bad that by the year 2750, the South Korean population may go extinct. South Korea is now facing an existential crisis once again, and this time it isn't because of war or extreme poverty, it's due to its own prosperity. South Korea has achieved its dream of becoming a wealthy nation, and now it must work on creating an environment where small businesses and young people thrive. If it can do this, then there is no doubt that this incredible nation will continue to flourish.